Mélanie Alix fire does not choose its victims. It does not think or hesitate or feel. It simply consumes. But on 2 separate nights 2 years apart, fire in the Quebec countryside was not random. It was selected. It was deliberate. And it was set by the same pair of hands, the hands of a daughter, and then a mother. The question that would haunt investigators, a jury, and an entire country was not whether Mélanie Alix had done it. The question was far darker than that. It was why someone would look at the 2 most helpless people in her life, a woman trapped in a wheelchair and a baby not yet old enough to walk, and choose fire. Francine Levesque was Mélanie's mother, a severely disabled woman who depended entirely on others for her survival. She used a wheelchair and could not escape on her own. On the night of January 31st, 2001, a fire broke out at Francine's home in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu, Quebec. By morning, she was dead. Investigators ruled the cause of death as smoke inhalation and initially concluded the blaze was accidental. Mélanie had been the last person to see her mother alive. She had lit the wood stove before leaving the house that evening. The case was closed. Grieving daughter, tragic accident, nothing more to see. But life has a way of pulling back curtains. 2 years later, on May 12, 2003, another fire broke out, this time in Saint-Blaise-sur-Richelieu, at a house where Mélanie was living with her young children. The owner of the property, Grégoire Racine, discovered the blaze after Mélanie failed to show up for an appointment. He pulled up to find the house consumed by flames and Mélanie outside, screaming hysterically. Inside that burning house was 1-year-old Mathis Alix Leblanc, her infant son. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Mélanie and her daughter had escaped. The baby had not. Crime scene technicians arrived and began their methodical work. What they found stopped them cold. The fire had not started in one location. It had started in four separate points of origin. The unmistakable signature of a deliberately set blaze. Mélanie was arrested that same week, and once investigators had her in custody, they went back. They reopened the death of Francine Levesque. They ordered a new autopsy on Mathis. What the pathologist found rewrote everything. Mathis had not died in the fire. The autopsy revealed that the baby had been dead for hours before the first flames appeared. He had been drugged. Someone had administered a sedative to a 1-year-old child, waited for him to lose consciousness, and then set the house alight around his small, silent body. Investigators then took the same lens to Francine's death and found an identical pattern. She too had been drugged before the fire. The wheelchair-bound woman, who could not have escaped under any circumstances, had been chemically incapacitated first, ensuring she never had the faintest chance. The trial that followed in 2005 was an extraordinary spectacle of denial and deflection. Mélanie Alix sat in that courtroom and pointed her finger at everyone except herself. She told the jury her brother had killed her mother. She told them Mathis's father had killed her son. Stéphane Leblanc, for his part, had spent years desperately trying to gain custody of his children, a man who wanted them alive, not dead. The jury listened to Mélanie's accusations, weighed them against the forensic evidence, and deliberated for 5 days. Their verdict was unanimous and unambiguous: guilty. 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of arson, 1 count of attempted murder. What kind of calculation does a person make when they look at their own mother, helpless, dependent, trusting, and decide that she is a problem to be solved with a sedative and a match? What runs through a person's mind in the quiet hours before they drug their own infant son and walk away from a burning house? There are no satisfying answers, because what Mélanie Alix did exists in a space beyond ordinary human comprehension. On December 22, 2005, she was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. She showed no remorse. 2 victims, 2 fires, 2 murders separated by exactly 731 days. As though she had measured the distance carefully enough to believe the pattern would never be noticed. It was noticed. And Mélanie Alix will spend the rest of her life behind the walls of a Canadian federal prison, serving time for the 2 people she was supposed to love most in the world: the mother who raised her, and the son she brought into it. Kathrine Andrus. When a person is found murdered inside their own home, the natural instinct of every investigator is to ask who had a reason to want them gone, who carried a grudge deep enough, who stood to gain. In the case of Michel Leblanc, a 53-year-old man found beaten to death in the bedroom of his Port Hope, Ontario home, the answer to both questions pointed devastatingly to the same person. The woman who had shared that bedroom with him for 16 years. The woman who had eaten dinner with him the night before. The woman who, by the time his body was discovered, was already at work, collected and composed, waiting for the news to break. What does it tell us about a person when the planning of a murder is more meticulous than the grief that is supposed to follow it? Michel Leblanc was by all accounts a straightforward man, a hard worker, a father, a stepfather, a grandfather many times over. He loved the outdoors, loved fishing, and loved his family with a quiet, dependable consistency. He and Kathrine Andrus had been common-law partners for 16 years, sharing a home on Pochon Avenue in Port Hope with their teenage son. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary life. But beneath the surface, Kathrine was carrying a secret she had managed to keep from Michel entirely. She was drowning in gambling debt and had been for some time. The pressure of that debt had not pushed her to confess or seek help. It had pushed her somewhere else entirely. Investigators would later establish that Kathrine had done her research. She knew exactly what Michel was worth to her dead. His life insurance policy and pension benefits combined would pay out over $370,000 upon his death, enough to erase her financial crisis and start over clean. With that knowledge locked in her mind, she began to plan. On September 24, 2009, Kathrine Andrus carried out what the sentencing judge would later call a vicious, callous, and cowardly killing. Before entering the bedroom where Michel lay sleeping, she removed her clothes. It was not a spontaneous act of passion, it was calculated. She did not want blood on her clothing. She took an aluminum baseball bat, entered the room, and struck Michel Leblanc with a force that the autopsy would later confirm was catastrophic. The pathologist testified that any one of the 5 blows she delivered could have killed him. She did not stop at one. She continued until she was certain. Then she put down the bat, walked to the shower, washed herself clean, got dressed, staged the scene to suggest a break-in had occurred, and went to work. It was their 16-year-old son who found him, on his birthday. There are details in true crime cases that are difficult to absorb, because they speak not just to what a person did, but to who they actually are. The fact that a boy celebrating his birthday came home to find his father's body is one of those details. It lives in the record not as background, but as a defining measure of the human cost of Kathrine Andrus's choices. Police grew suspicious. The story Kathrine told did not hold together under sustained scrutiny. To break through it, investigators deployed an undercover operation. Officers posed as members of a criminal organization and told her they had the power to make her problem disappear. But first, she needed to tell them exactly what she had done. Kathrine Andrus told them everything. That confession became the cornerstone of the case against her. Faced with the forensic evidence and the recorded confession, Kathrine Andrus did not take the case to trial. On November 27, 2012, her 53rd birthday, she stood in an Oshawa courtroom and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. The judge did not mince words. The killing was described as premeditated, deliberate, and driven by naked financial greed. She was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 12 years. Michel Leblanc's daughters have shown up to every hearing, every anniversary, fighting for their father's memory. For them, the sentence is not sufficient. For them, the man who loved fishing and spent time with his family deserved far more than the justice the courtroom delivered. Nirmala Arjun's crimes, no matter how brutal, have a shape to them. A reason, a grievance that festered too long, a relationship that collapsed, a calculation gone wrong. Even in their darkness, they follow a logic that human beings, however disturbed, can trace back to something recognizable. And then there are cases that offer none of that. Cases where investigators spend years searching for a motive and walk away with nothing. Cases where the violence itself is the only story, and the question of why hangs in the air long after the courtroom goes silent. The case of Nirmala Arjun and William Canning is one of those cases. It is not a story of passion or jealousy or greed. It is a story of something far more unsettling, a killing with no explanation that anyone has ever been able to give. William Peter Canning was 65 years old and had been living a transient life for years, without a permanent home of his own. He was a familiar presence to Nirmala Arjun, a Vancouver woman who lived in a suite in the 2100 block of Cassiar Street. The two had known each other for some time. Canning helped look after her dog, A small, ordinary connection between two people on the fringes of each other's lives. There was nothing in the record of their relationship to suggest hostility. There was nothing to suggest that on the morning of January 29, 2009, William Canning would walk into that apartment and never walk out. What investigators found when police were called to Cassiar Street at 7:15 that morning was a scene of extraordinary violence. William Canning had been attacked with a meat cleaver. He had not been killed quickly. The evidence told a story of sustained, relentless assault, more than 50 blade wounds covering his body. He had not simply fallen where the attack began. He had moved. He had fled through the apartment, still alive, still fighting against what was being done to him, until he finally collapsed and died in the bathroom. The physical record of his final moments was written across that apartment in a way that left no room for ambiguity. Nirmala Arjun was the one who called police to report the death. She was taken in for questioning that same day and then released. Investigators had their suspicions, but suspicions are not evidence. For a year and a half, the Vancouver Police Department's Major Crimes Section worked the investigation quietly. On July 29, 2010, 18 months after William Canning died on the bathroom floor of her apartment, Nirmala Arjun was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. What made this case particularly haunting as it moved through the legal system was the silence at its center. No motive was ever established, none. In a trial where a jury heard the details of what had been done to William Canning, the more than 50 wounds, the chase through the apartment, the meat cleaver, they were given no explanation for why it had happened. No argument, no dispute, no financial entanglement, no romantic conflict. Two people who knew each other, a man who cared for her dog, and then 50+ wounds and a body in the bathroom. The jury deliberated and returned a verdict of guilty. On November 7, 2013, Nirmala Arjun was found guilty of second-degree murder. She was 55 years old. On April 27, 2014, she was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 12 years. What does it mean for a crime to have no motive? For the families of victims, the absence of a reason is often its own particular kind of cruelty. At least when there is a reason, however twisted or selfish, there is something to point to, something to understand. When there is nothing, the world feels fundamentally less predictable. If a man can be chased through an apartment and killed with more than 50 blows by someone he trusted enough to leave his dog with, and no one can ever say why, what does that tell us about the nature of the people we allow close to us? William Canning was a man without a permanent address, connected to the world through small arrangements of trust. He was found dead in a bathroom, and the woman who killed him has never offered the world a single word of explanation for what she did. That silence is the loudest part of this story. Penny Boudreau. There is a question that every parent is never supposed to have to answer, because the answer is supposed to be so obvious it requires no thought at all. If someone told you that you had to choose between the person you were dating and your own child, what would you do? For any reasonable parent, there is no deliberation. There is no weight placed on each side of the scale. The child wins. The child always wins. But on January 27, 2008, in the small Nova Scotia town of Bridgewater, 33-year-old mother named Penny Boudreau was given that choice, and she made the other one. Penny Boudreau worked as a cashier at a grocery store in Bridgewater, a quiet South Shore town of fewer than 9,000 people. Her boyfriend, Vernon McCumber, worked at the same store. Their relationship had become the center of her world, consuming, volatile, and defining. At home, the tension between Carissa and McCumber had become a source of constant conflict. He communicated, in words that the Crown would later note he did not mean as an instruction to commit murder, that something had to change. Penny Boudreau received those words as an ultimatum, the child or him. An agreed statement of facts, read aloud in a Bridgewater courtroom, would later record this, in language almost too plain to bear. She would do anything for Vernon, and the thought of losing him was harder than the thought of losing her daughter. She had been thinking about killing Carissa for days before she did it. She had packed a length of twine in the trunk of her car. This was not a moment of madness. This was a decision made in advance, carried forward with purpose. On the night of January 27, 2008, Penny Boudreau drove Carissa out to a remote stretch of road called William Hebrodihebvamilv outside of Bridgewater. It was dark. It was snowing. They got out of the car and argued. Then Penny Boudreau tackled her 12-year-old daughter to the ground, knelt on her chest, and strangled her with the twine. The court heard that as she pressed down, she could feel Carissa's hands digging into the frozen earth beneath her. Carissa Boudreau's last words to her mother were four. "Mommy, don't." They were not enough to stop her. After Carissa stopped moving, Penny put her daughter's body in the car. She drove to a spot along the Le Havre River. She dragged the body from the car, and before leaving it at the embankment, pulled down Carissa's clothing to make it appear as though the girl had been sexually assaulted. Then she rolled her daughter's body down into the dark. She threw the twine away in a coffee cup and drove home. What followed was a performance of grief. Penny Boudreau reported her daughter missing. She gave tearful public statements, appealing to the community, to anyone watching, to help find her little girl. She stood before cameras in the emotional posture of a desperate mother, and told a story that had no truth in it at all. Bridgewater rallied around her. Candlelight vigils were organized. A community searched for a child its mother had already killed. Carissa's frozen body was found on February 9, 2008, 2 weeks after she had been left on that riverbank. To break through Penny's story, investigators deployed an undercover operation. Officers posed as members of a criminal organization, telling her they had the power to make her problem disappear. But first, she needed to tell them exactly what she had done. Penny Boudreau told them everything. She took one of the undercover agents to the location where she had killed her daughter and reenacted what she had done on the very ground where it had happened. In January 2009, Penny Boudreau stood in Nova Scotia Supreme Court and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. Justice Margaret Stewart sentenced her to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 20 years, telling her, "You can never call yourself mother in conjunction with Carissa's name again." Carissa's father, Paul Boudreau, watched his daughter's killer sob her apology. He had 2 words for the performance: crocodile tears. Rachel Capra Craig, there is a particular cruelty in a delusion. Not for the person who holds it. They cannot see past it, cannot test it, cannot let it go, but for the people caught inside it with. A delusion does not announce itself. It does not come with a warning. It simply becomes the operating reality of the person who carries it, as real and urgent and undeniable to them as anything the rest of the world can see. And when that delusion is believed by a mother, and when the person trapped inside it with her is her own child, the consequences can be irreversible. That is what the record shows happened in a quiet suburban home in Pointe-Claire, Quebec, on March 19, 2001, the day Chelsea Craig died. Chelsea Craig was 14 years old and had spent her entire life managing a condition that demanded everything her mother had to give. Rett syndrome is a rare neurological disorder that strikes girls almost exclusively, developing normally for the first months of life before quietly beginning to dismantle what the brain has built. By the time Chelsea was a teenager, it had taken her speech, her ability to feed herself, her control over her hands and her bladder. She wore a helmet to protect her during seizures. She needed to be diapered up to 15 times a day and fed by spoon. She could not be in direct sunlight for more than a few minutes. But she was, by every account of those who knew her, a person fully present inside a body that refused to cooperate, curious, expressive, known for her eyes. Her mother, Rachel Capra Craig, had cared for her full-time for years. Rachel had a history of depression stretching back more than 2 decades. What psychiatrists would later establish was that at some point before March of 2001, Rachel's fragile mental architecture had given way to something far more dangerous. A fixed, unshakable delusion that Chelsea's father was sexually abusing their daughter. There was no evidence for this belief, no reports, no observations by anyone else, no corroboration of any kind. The abuse existed only inside Rachel's mind, but inside her mind it was as real as the walls around her. She decided she would not leave Chelsea behind. She had planned to die. She had left a suicide note in Chelsea's bedroom, a document expressing her wish to donate her savings and insurance money to charities. But when she faced the reality of what would happen to Chelsea after she was gone, that the girl would be left in the care of a father Rachel believed to be a monster, the plan shifted. On March 19, 2001, Rachel Capra Craig ground up a mixture of prescription drugs and administered it to Chelsea as she lay in bed. She then consumed the same mixture herself. Her husband found them when he returned from work that evening. Chelsea was dead. Rachel survived, was hospitalized, and was taken into custody the following morning. She was charged with first-degree murder. Psychiatric evaluations found Rachel to be suffering from a paranoid delusional disorder so entrenched that she had lost the capacity to distinguish her internal reality from the external one. Psychiatrist Renée Fougère testified that Rachel would have done the same thing to a healthy child. It was not Chelsea's condition that had motivated the killing, but the delusion about the father. The prosecutor made it plain. This was not the Latimer case. It was not a mercy killing. Chelsea had not been killed to end her suffering. She had been killed to protect her from something that had never happened. On February 20th, 2002, Justice Fraser Martin ruled that Rachel Capra Craig was not criminally responsible for Chelsea's death by reason of mental disorder. She was committed to a secure psychiatric unit in Montreal. The case never produced a conviction, a sentence, or a prison term. It produced instead a psychiatric placement and a system obligated to manage what the courts could not punish. It managed it for less than 5 months. On July 6, 2002, during an unsupervised outing from the facility, her second, Rachel Capra Craig, took her own life. The criminal case was closed. Chelsea Craig deserved better from the system that was supposed to protect her, and from the mother who, in the grip of something she could not control, took away every remaining day she had left. Evelyn Dick. In the spring of 1946, a schoolyard rhyme began spreading through the streets of Hamilton, Ontario. Children sang it in playgrounds and on sidewalks, in the way that children absorb the darkest things their city produces and turn them into something almost cheerful. The words went, "You cut off his legs, you cut off his arms, you cut off his head. How could you, Mrs. Dick? How could you, Mrs. Dick?" It was sung by children who had no real grasp of what they were repeating. But the adults of Hamilton understood exactly what it meant. They had seen the photographs. They had read the headlines. They had watched a woman who wore pearls and fur coats and red lipstick stand before the courts and explain, in story after contradicting story, how she knew absolutely nothing about any of it. John Dick was 39 years old, a streetcar conductor for the Hamilton Street Railway, and Evelyn McLean's husband of barely 5 months, when he vanished in early March of 1946. Their marriage had been turbulent almost from the start. On March 16, 1946, 5 children who had been out walking near Albion Falls on Hamilton's Niagara Escarpment stumbled across a human torso, headless and limbless, lying in the open. When police identified it as John Dick, they followed the trail to his wife. Evelyn's response when told the torso belonged to her husband was immediate and utterly composed. "Don't look at me. I don't know anything about it." She then proceeded to offer investigators a series of explanations, each one contradicting the last. A Natalie-dressed Italian hitman, a phone call from a jealous stranger, stories that changed and shifted and collapsed under scrutiny in the way only invented stories do. What investigators eventually established was that John Dick's head and limbs had been disposed of in the furnace of her home at 32 Carrick Avenue. The torso had been transported to the escarpment, likely in Evelyn's black Packard, which was found with bloodstains inside. But the furnace and the torso were not the worst of what detectives found inside that house. In the attic, they located a beige suitcase. The suitcase was filled with concrete, and inside the concrete was the partly mummified body of a male infant. The child was identified as Peter David White, Evelyn Dick's son, fathered by a man who was not her husband. He had been strangled, then encased, then stored in a suitcase in an attic, sealed inside stone, as though the plan had always been simply to never think about him again. Evelyn was tried for John Dick's murder in 1946. The jury convicted her and she was sentenced to hang. It should have been the end. It was not. Her new lawyer, the celebrated J.J. Robinette, appealed the conviction on the grounds that certain statements she had made to police had been improperly admitted into evidence. The Court of Appeal agreed, and the murder conviction was overturned. She was acquitted of killing her husband. The Crown then tried her separately for the death of her infant son. This time the jury returned a verdict of manslaughter rather than murder, and she was sentenced to life in prison. Hamilton was outraged. The woman who had been spared the gallows for her husband's murder was now spared again from a murder conviction for her dead baby. The city watched her walk into Kingston's prison for women instead of to a scaffold, and they did not forget. Evelyn Dick served 11 years. In 1958, she was paroled. She was given a new identity, a new job, and she vanished. She did not simply fade from the headlines. She disappeared entirely and deliberately from any traceable public record. Her file was permanently sealed. A royal pardon was quietly issued in 1985. Whatever name she carried after 1958, wherever she lived, whatever she became, none of it has ever been confirmed. What remains is a schoolyard rhyme that Canadian children once sang without understanding it, and two victims who deserved far more than the justice that was actually delivered. Cherrylle Dell, there is something uniquely calculated about choosing wine as the vessel for a poison. Wine is intimacy. Wine is a shared evening, a lowered guard, a toast to something worth celebrating. When Cherrylle Dell brought a bottle of Piat d'Or to her estranged husband in December of 1995, she was not offering a gesture of reconciliation. She was offering a death she had been planning, researching, and preparing for months. Wrapped in the language of warmth, handed over in the spirit of the holiday season, opened and consumed by a man who had no idea that the woman he still loved had already decided he would not survive the night. Scott and Cherrylle Dell had moved to Killaloe, a country village south of Pembroke, with fewer than 1,000 residents, back in 1988. Scott was a social worker described as kind and gentle, a man with an aura about him that people remembered long after meeting him. By the mid-1990s, the marriage had fractured. Cherrylle had left Scott for another woman, and the couple had separated. But Scott had not given up on the idea of his wife coming back. He was still hopeful. He was still reachable. Cherrylle knew this, and she used it. In the summer of 1995, Cherrylle visited a local veterinarian and asked, under the pretense of concern for her dog, about the effects of antifreeze poisoning. That fall, she called poison control, concealing her identity, seeking to know the precise lethal dose of antifreeze for a human being. She had by then begun a new relationship with Nancy Fillmore, a social worker, and it was Fillmore who would later tell police what she had witnessed in Cherylle's kitchen. The antifreeze, the wine bottle, and Cherylle's hissed instruction to keep quiet and say nothing. Scott had been battling oral cancer that had spread to his throat and lymph nodes. He won that fight, came out the other side in remission, looking forward to what came next. When Cherrylle came to him just after Christmas with the bottle of wine, she told him she'd had a dream, a vision of their future together. If he drank the wine, she said, he would see it too. Scott Dell took the bottle, he went home, he opened it, he drank. Cherrylle returned to Fillmore's house and stayed on the phone with Scott for hours, keeping him drinking, keeping him on the line while ethylene glycol spread silently through his system. Toxicology would later reveal ethylene glycol in his blood at more than 3 times a fatal concentration. Police initially ruled it suicide. Nancy Fillmore was the only person alive who knew the truth. She carried it for a year and a half before the weight of it broke her open. In March of 1997, she went to the Ontario Provincial Police and told them everything. Within months of giving that statement, Nancy Fillmore was dead. A fire broke out in her apartment building in Killaloe, and she was trapped inside. Police eventually arrested a teenage boy named Brent Crawford for setting the blaze. Under interrogation, Crawford admitted he had done it under Cherrylle Dell's direction. The star witness against Cherrylle Dell had been burned alive to silence her. The trial was complex, the case built largely on circumstantial evidence now that its most important witness was gone. But a cellmate came forward and testified that Cherrylle had confessed the entire murder to her in detail. That testimony, combined with the evidence of months of antifreeze research, was enough. In 2001, Ontario Superior Court Justice James Chadwick convicted Cherrylle Dell of first-degree murder in the death of her husband. He sentenced her to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. She was then tried separately for Nancy Fillmore's murder and convicted of first-degree murder a second time. 2 convictions, 2 victims. One woman who turned a bottle of wine and a phone call into the instruments of a carefully engineered death, and then tried to erase the only person who could have ever proved it. Kathrine Dufresne. When a community loses a child, it instinctively looks outward. It scans for the stranger, the threat from outside, the person who does not belong. It almost never looks toward the person who packed lunches and drove carpool and was known by name at the local pizzeria. And so when Murray Fitzpatrick arrived home to his family's house in the Kingsmere area of Chelsea, Quebec, on October 22, 2011, and found his 7-year-old daughter, Sophie, unconscious on the floor, and his wife seriously injured nearby, the community that surrounded them did not know what to think. They had seen Kathrine Dufresne and little Sophie the day before, laughing over pizza slices at Cheesy Luigi's as they often did, a mother and daughter who came in a couple of times a week and always seemed completely, genuinely happy. Sophie Fitzpatrick was 7 years old and had been adopted from China at the age of 2. She had grown up in Chelsea, surrounded by a tight-knit community in which her family was well known and actively involved. Her father, Murray, was an investment advisor. Her mother, Kathrine, known to neighbors and local business owners as Kathy Fitzpatrick, was a familiar presence in the small town just north of Gatineau. The Fitzpatricks were, by every visible measure, a stable and happy family. The suicide note Murray found at the scene told a different story, one in which Kathrine had planned this outcome in advance, with an intention to take Sophie with her. According to police, Kathrine had lain on top of her daughter and asphyxiated her. Sophie was pronounced dead at hospital. Kathrine, who had also attempted to take her own life, survived her injuries. She was taken into custody and charged with first-degree murder. What followed was not a trial. Kathrine Dufresne underwent a 30-day psychiatric evaluation to determine whether she was fit to stand trial. The results were presented in court on January 9, 2012. A judge ruled that she was fit. She had no prior history of violence, no known history of mental illness that had ever required intervention or treatment before October 22nd. The community of Chelsea was left to absorb what they could not understand. That the woman who had been Sophie's mother, who had laughed with her over pizza 24 hours before her death, had been the one to end her life. 2 days after being found fit for trial, Kathrine Dufresne was dead. On January 11, 2012, she was found unconscious in the shower at the Hull Detention Center where she was being held. She had hanged herself. A judge had specifically ordered her transferred to a facility where her condition could be regularly monitored. She was at Hull awaiting that transfer when she found a way to do what the first attempt had not accomplished. The case ended there. No trial, no verdict. No findings of fact from a courtroom about what had happened inside the Kingsmere home or why. What investigators had established, a note, a theory of what occurred, a charge of first-degree murder, became the permanent record, frozen at the moment before anything could be tested in open court. Sophie Fitzpatrick was a 7-year-old girl who loved music, laughed easily, and had been chosen by her parents to be their daughter 5 years before she died. The legal process produced no conviction. The only lasting record is the name of a child who deserved far more time, and a case that closed before anyone could answer the question the community has been asking ever since. Kelly Ellard, there are crimes that force a nation to look at itself, not just at the people involved, not just at what happened under a bridge on a cold November night, but at the conditions that made it possible. The social architecture of exclusion, the cruelty that adolescence can produce when it goes unchecked, the particular and devastating vulnerability of a child who does not fit in, who is too eager, too different, too hungry for belonging to recognize when what is being offered to her is not inclusion but a trap. Rena Verk was 14 years old when she walked toward a group of teenagers gathered near the Craigflower Bridge in Saanich, British Columbia, on the night of November 14, 1997. She was hoping to belong. She never came home. Rena had grown up as the daughter of Indian immigrants in a mostly white suburban community. She was heavy-set, insecure, and known to her peers for trying too hard, borrowing things, telling small lies to seem more interesting, working desperately to be included in social groups that were not particularly interested in including her. By the time she joined the gathering near the bridge that night, she had already made enemies among the girls who were there. It would cost her everything. What began under that bridge was a group attack. At least 6 teenage girls swarmed Rena, hitting her, burning her with cigarettes, tearing out strands of her hair. When it was over, the group walked away. Battered and bleeding, Rena managed to pull herself to her feet and begin crossing the bridge toward a bus stop. She was trying to go home. She almost made it. 2 of the attackers turned back. One was 17-year-old Warren Glowatsky. The other was 15-year-old Kelly Ellard. What followed was not a continuation of group violence. It was something more deliberate. Ellard and Glowatsky caught up with Rena, smashed her head against a tree, and knocked her unconscious. They dragged her to the edge of the gorge waterway and held her under. A pathologist who later examined Rena's body found her brain severely swollen, her body bearing the marks of at least 18 forceful blows, pebbles embedded in her throat from drowning face down in shallow water. A shoe imprint was found on her skull, consistent with a stomp. Rena's body was found 8 days later, adrift in the inlet by police divers. In the days that followed, Kelly Ellard did not hide. She bragged. Multiple witnesses came forward in subsequent years to testify that Ellard had joked about how she kicked Rena into the water, described holding her head under with her foot, laughed about finishing off a girl and breaking her arms. She returned to school and ordinary life while Rena Verk lay at the bottom of the gorge. What came next was one of the most prolonged and legally exhausting trials in Canadian history. Ellard was convicted of second-degree murder in her first trial in 2000, but that verdict was overturned on appeal. A second trial in 2004 ended in a hung jury, 11-1 in favor of conviction. A third trial in 2005 produced a guilty verdict. She was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 7 years. The BC Court of Appeal overturned the third conviction on a technicality. The Crown took the case to the Supreme Court of Canada. In June 2009, nearly 12 years after Rena drowned, the Supreme Court reinstated the conviction in an 8-1 ruling. By 2018, Ellard had changed her name to Kerry Marie Sim. As of 2026, she continues to live under that name. Her day parole periodically extended and periodically revoked. Her risk assessment rating consistently noted as moderate to high moderate for future violence. Rena Verk's mother, Suman Verk, spent years advocating against youth violence before dying herself in a tragic accident in 2023. Rena's father, Manjit Verk, endured every trial, every appeal, every parole hearing. Kelly Ellard, now Kerry Sim, continues to breathe. Lulonda Lynn Flett, when anger reaches a certain temperature, it stops being personal. It stops being about the specific person who caused it and becomes something else entirely. A force that spreads beyond its intended target, consuming everything in its path without distinction or mercy. That is what happened at 288 Austin Street North, in Winnipeg's Point Douglas neighborhood, in the early morning hours of July 16, 2011. Lulonda Lynn Flett arrived at that rooming house drunk and furious, with one person in mind. She left behind 5 dead strangers who had never done anything to her at all. Lulonda Flett was 40 years old and had grown up carrying a weight that the sentencing judge would later acknowledge in full. A history of chronic domestic abuse, emotional neglect, sexual abuse that had gone unreported and untreated, disrupted schooling, and no meaningful mental health interventions at any point in her life. She was a mother of 6, originally from a remote northern First Nation community. What she had, in the Point Douglas neighborhood, was a sister-in-law named Lynette Harper, a woman toward whom Flett carried a hatred long and deep enough to have already landed her in court. Just 1 week before the fire, a judge had issued a no-contact order after Flett pleaded guilty to a 2009 physical assault on Harper. On the night of July 15th into the early morning of the 16th, Lulonda Flett was drinking. Whatever combination of alcohol and accumulated grievance produced what came next, what is recorded is that she made her way to the rooming house on Austin Street where Harper was staying, and she set fire to it. The fire almost certainly started near the front entrance, on or near the veranda, and moved quickly. Because the fire started at the front entrance, it blocked the most obvious path out of the building. For the people sleeping inside, the exit was gone before they were fully awake. There were 8 people in the home that night. 3 managed to escape, including Lynette Harper, the woman Flett had come to harm, who walked out alive. The 5 who did not were Norman Darius Anderson, 22 years old, Maureen Claire Harper, 54, Kenneth Bradley Monkman, 49, Dean James Strandon, 44, and Robert Curtis Lafort, 56, who fought for 2 days in hospital before dying. None of them had any involvement in the dispute between Flett and her sister-in-law. They were simply people who had rented rooms in a rooming house in Point Douglas, who had gone to sleep that night and had no reason to expect they would not wake up in the morning. Flett was arrested, and initially faced 5 counts of second-degree murder and 3 counts of attempted murder. In October 2012, she pleaded guilty to 5 counts of manslaughter and 1 count of arson as part of a plea agreement. Her lawyer told the court his client had not intended to kill anyone. The sentencing judge, Justice Brenda Keyser, acknowledged Flett's cognitive challenges and the enormous hardships of her life. She considered all of it. And then she concluded that the evidence showed Flett had been capable of recognizing the risk she was taking when she set that fire, and that a life sentence was fair and just. On June 12, 2013, Lulonda Flett was sentenced to 5 concurrent life sentences, 1 for each person who died. Because the sentences ran concurrently, and because she received 2 years credit for time served, she became eligible to apply for parole in approximately 5 years. At her sentencing hearing, Flett read a statement saying, "I never meant to cause so much trouble. I'm hoping by doing time that everyone will forgive me." The mother of Robert Lafort told the court that in the last minute of his life, her son looked at her before he passed. 5 people who had retired to their rooms on an ordinary July night, Norman, Maureen, Kenneth, Dean, and Robert, deserve to be remembered because in this story they are the only ones who had no choices left to make.